The mental powers you forgot you had. Introduction. Before anything appears in your world, it first exists within you, not as an event, not as a circumstance, but as a state of mind. Most people move through life believing that power is external, in money, in position, in chance, in other people. They look outward for causes and inward only for reactions. Yet the ancient teaching, echoed quietly through the centuries, reveals something far more unsettling and far more empowering. The true power is a mental state. The powers explored in this audiobook are not extraordinary abilities reserved for a few, nor are they mystical talents granted by chance. They are natural mental faculties, capacities every human being already possesses, often in an undeveloped and unconscious state. When trained and directed, these faculties can radically alter the course of a person's life, not through spectacle, but through lawful inner change. This work is based on the teachings of William Walker Atkinson, one of the most precise and disciplined thinkers of the New Thought tradition. Atkinson did not treat mental power as fantasy or belief. He approached it as mental mechanics, cause and effect, operating on an invisible plane, governed by principles as exact as those of the physical world. His central assertion was simple and quietly revolutionary. The mind is not weak, it is untrained. Most people live as if thought were passive, something that happens to them rather than something they use. Ideas arise, emotions follow, reactions repeat, and patterns harden into what feels like fate. Life appears accidental, unpredictable, and external. Yet beneath this surface experience operates a consistent order. Thought is not a shadow of reality. Thought is a causal force. Every habit you live with, every limitation you accept, every pattern that repeats itself once existed as a mental state, sustained long enough to become familiar, and then automatic. The delay between inner cause and outer effect hides this process, creating the illusion that circumstances arise independently of the mind. They do not. This audiobook is not about controlling the world, bending reality, or escaping responsibility. It is about understanding the laws under which your mind already operates, and learning to cooperate with them deliberately, rather than unconsciously. By mental powers, we mean faculties such as attention, concentration, will, imagination, emotional regulation, and inner stillness. These are not abstract concepts. They are practical forces that determine how energy is directed, how habits are formed, how decisions are made, and how life responds over time. Used unconsciously, they produce inconsistency. Used deliberately, they produce coherence. Atkinson emphasized that mental power develops the same way physical power does, through understanding, repetition, and discipline. No belief is required, no blind faith is necessary, only application. The tragedy is not that these powers are hidden, it is that they are ignored. From an early age, most people are trained to manage outer conditions while leaving the inner world largely undisciplined. Attention is scattered, thought is reactive. Emotion governs decision-making. The mind becomes busy, but not directed, active, but not powerful. As a result, many live with a sense of effort without control, always responding, rarely commanding. The purpose of this work is to reverse that condition. As you listen, you will not be asked to accept extraordinary claims. You will be invited to observe your own mind, recognize its patterns, and understand the mechanisms through which inner states become lived experience. You will begin to notice that what once felt fixed is actually fluid, and what once seemed inevitable is often habitual. Change does not begin with force. It begins with clarity. When the mind is understood, it stops working against itself. Energy once lost through inner conflict becomes available. Direction replaces drift. Calm replaces compulsion. Over time, life begins to respond not to urgency or struggle, but to alignment. This is not a promise of instant transformation. It is an invitation to mastery through law. The powers described here will not make you extraordinary. They will make you effective. And effectiveness, sustained over time, is what changes a life. This is where the work begins. Chapter 1. The Mind as a Plane of Power. The mind is not a byproduct of life. It is the field in which life takes shape. Most people think of the mind as something that reacts, a place where thoughts appear, emotions rise, and memories pass through. But this is only the surface activity. Beneath this movement exists a deeper truth, one that has been known to initiates, philosophers, and metaphysical thinkers across centuries. The mind is a plane of power. Just as the physical world operates according to laws of gravity, motion, and cause and effect, the mental world operates according to its own principles. These laws are not symbolic. They are not dependent on belief. They function with the same precision whether they are understood or ignored. What you experience as life is the end of a process, not the beginning. The beginning occurs on the mental plane. Every action begins as an impulse. Every impulse begins as a thought. Every sustained thought establishes a mental state. And every mental state sets causation in motion. This is why attempting to change conditions without addressing mental causes produces only temporary results. You may alter the surface of life, but the underlying pattern eventually reasserts itself. The unseen current continues to flow in the same direction, carrying circumstances with it. The mental plane is the realm of origination. Here, ideas are conceived. Here, tendencies are formed. Here, habits are seeded long before they harden into behavior. When this plane is left unmanaged, it becomes crowded with impressions from the outside world, opinions, fears, inherited beliefs, emotional reactions. The mind becomes a marketplace of borrowed thoughts rather than a center of authority. In such a state, a person does not use the mind. The mind uses the person. But when this plane is understood and consciously governed, something changes fundamentally. Thought becomes deliberate rather than automatic. Attention becomes focused rather than scattered. Inner life gains direction, and outer life begins to reflect that order. This is not a matter of suppressing thoughts or forcing control. Force is a crude instrument. Mental mastery is not achieved through strain, but through understanding. When you know how a law operates, you no longer fight it, you cooperate with it. The mental plane responds instantly to direction. It resists only confusion. Consider how effortlessly the mind drifts when left alone. One thought leads to another. Images arise without invitation. Emotions surface without warning. This is not a flaw of the mind. It is evidence of its power. Energy seeks expression. Without guidance, it disperses. Undirected power is never neutral. It either creates unconsciously or destroys gradually. This is why inner discipline precedes all outer achievement. Before results can stabilize in the visible world, order must be established in the invisible one. A disciplined mental plane produces clarity. A chaotic mental plane produces contradiction. The moment you recognize the mind as a plane of power, responsibility shifts inward. No longer can circumstances be blamed exclusively. No longer can patterns be dismissed as chance. You begin to see that life is not happening to you. It is unfolding through you. This realization is not meant to induce guilt or pressure. It is meant to restore agency. You are not expected to control every thought. You are expected to choose the direction. Direction is everything. A river guided by banks becomes forceful and useful. The same water, spread thin across land, loses its strength. In the same way, mental power becomes effective only when it is contained, guided, and purposefully applied. From this point forward, you are no longer merely a thinker of thoughts. You are a custodian of mental energy. And as you begin to understand this, a subtle shift occurs. You stop waiting for life to arrange itself. You stop reacting to every impression. You begin to sense an inner stillness, not emptiness, but readiness. This is the foundation upon which all mental power is built. Before attention can be trained, the mind must be recognized as sovereign territory. Before concentration can be strengthened, the plane itself must be claimed. In the next movement of this work, you will begin to understand the first and most essential faculty of mental mastery, the power of attention, the gateway through which all higher mental abilities must pass. Chapter 2. The Power of Attention. Attention is the gateway through which all mental power must pass. Without it, thought remains weak, scattered, and ineffective. With it, even the simplest idea gains weight, clarity, and direction. Attention is not merely a function of the mind, it is the act of choosing what shall receive life. Where attention rests, energy flows. Most people believe they lack power because they lack ability. In truth, they lack command of attention. Their thoughts are constantly pulled outward by noise, emotion, urgency, and habit. The mind becomes reactive, not because it is incapable, but because it has never been trained to remain where it is placed. Attention is the first proof of inner authority. Observe how effortlessly attention moves when ungoverned. It jumps from concern to memory, from desire to fear, from image to impulse. This movement feels natural, but it is not harmless. Every shift drains energy. Every uncontrolled fixation strengthens whatever it rests upon. This is why worry exhausts, why fear multiplies, why idle thought becomes persistent. Attention feeds what it touches. When it lingers on weakness, weakness grows. When it rests on limitation, limitation becomes structure. The mind does not ask whether an object of attention is useful or harmful. It simply magnifies. To understand this is to reclaim power. Attention is not concentration yet. Concentration is attention held. Attention is the act of placing. It is the hand that directs the beam before it is focused. Without mastery of this faculty, higher mental discipline is impossible. This is why the earliest stage of mental training always begins here. You cannot will effectively what you cannot attend to. You cannot imagine clearly what you cannot hold in awareness. You cannot govern thought if attention is constantly stolen by impulse. To train attention is not to force stillness, it is to notice choice. At first, you will become aware of how little choice you believe you have. Attention seems to wander on its own. Thoughts arise without permission, feelings intrude without invitation. This realization is not failure, it is awakening. Awareness precedes control. The moment you notice where your attention has gone, you have already reclaimed a measure of power. Each return strengthens the faculty. Each deliberate placement restores authority. Over time, attention becomes less reactive and more obedient. This is not achieved through tension. Tension scatters energy. Attention responds to calm direction, not strain. The mind learns through repetition, not punishment. You do not wrestle attention into place. You invite it back again and again. As this faculty strengthens, something subtle occurs. Inner noise decreases. Thought slows without dulling. Mental energy feels more contained, more available. You begin to experience moments where the mind does not pull away immediately. Moments where awareness remains steady. These moments are the threshold. Attention is the gatekeeper of all mental states. It determines what enters consciousness and what fades away. What you repeatedly attend to becomes familiar. What becomes familiar becomes automatic, and what becomes automatic shapes character, behavior, and destiny. This is why mastery begins not with changing thoughts, but with choosing focus. The world constantly competes for your attention because attention is power. Every demand, every distraction, every emotional hook is an attempt to redirect your inner force outward. When attention is perpetually externalized, inner life weakens. But when attention is reclaimed, even briefly, a new relationship with thought begins to form. You stop being carried by the current, you begin to stand within it. Attention teaches the mind to listen. It is the first act of inner discipline and the first sign that mental power is awakening. Once attention can be placed deliberately, it can be sustained. And when it can be sustained, it can be concentrated. That is where power ceases to drift and begins to gather. In the next stage, you will learn how attention, when held without interruption, transforms into concentration, and how concentration condenses mental force into something capable of shaping outcomes rather than merely observing them. Chapter 3. Concentration, the gathering of mental force. Concentration is attention that has learned to remain. Where attention places the mind, concentration holds it there. This distinction is subtle, yet it marks the dividing line between ordinary mental activity and genuine mental power. Attention is the act of choosing a point of focus. Concentration is the discipline that refuses to abandon it. Most people believe they concentrate when they are merely interested. Interest is passive. Concentration is active command. A scattered mind may touch many ideas, but it penetrates none of them. A concentrated mind may hold a single idea, yet draw from it a depth of power that scattered thinking never accesses. This is why concentration has always been associated with mastery, genius, and effectiveness, not because it makes one smarter, but because it condenses mental energy. Power in every domain is the result of accumulation. A single drop of water is harmless. Gathered into a river, it shapes landscapes. Focused through pressure, it cuts stone. Mental energy follows the same law. When thought is spread thin across many objects, it weakens. When gathered and held, it intensifies. This is the true nature of concentration. Most failures attributed to lack of talent are, in truth, failures of sustained attention. The mind begins a thought, abandons it, starts a direction, diverts, forms an intention, then dissolves it through distraction. Nothing is carried far enough to produce an effect. Concentration corrects this leakage, but it must be understood correctly. Concentration is not strain. Strain is resistance, and resistance creates inner conflict. True concentration feels firm but calm, steady but relaxed. It is the quiet insistence of the will, not the tension of effort. The untrained mind confuses intensity with force. It tries to grip thought tightly, to force it into stillness. This only produces fatigue and frustration. The trained mind does something far simpler. It returns again and again, without emotional reaction. Each return strengthens the faculty. At first, the mind rebels. Thoughts intrude, sensations demand attention, old habits reassert themselves. This resistance is not a sign that concentration is impossible. It is evidence that the mind has long been allowed to wander unchecked. What has been undisciplined resists discipline, but resistance fades with consistency. The mind learns, as any instrument does, through repetition. Each time attention is brought back to the chosen object, a subtle groove is formed. Over time, thought follows this groove naturally, without effort. This is how concentration becomes power rather than struggle. When concentration develops, something remarkable begins to happen. Thought acquires weight. Ideas no longer feel fleeting or abstract. They take on substance. You begin to feel that when you hold a thought, it holds you in return. Mental images become clearer. Decisions feel more grounded. Inner dialogue quiets. This is because concentration unifies the mind. A scattered mind is divided against itself. One part thinks, another doubts. One part desires, another resists. Concentration resolves this division by gathering attention into a single direction. When the mind is unified, it moves forward without internal friction. This unity is the foundation of will. Without concentration, the will cannot operate effectively. It issues commands that the mind does not obey. Intentions form and dissolve before they reach the deeper layers of consciousness. With concentration, the will speaks once, and the mind listens. This is why concentration precedes all higher mental faculties. Imagination without concentration becomes fantasy. Will without concentration becomes forceful, but inconsistent. Thought without concentration becomes noise, but concentration transforms all of them. When imagination is held steadily, it becomes formative. When it is sustained, it becomes directive. When thought is concentrated, it becomes causative. This is also why concentration is rare. It demands patience, and patience is incompatible with constant stimulation. Modern life rewards speed, reaction, and surface engagement. It trains the mind to skim rather than to dwell, to move rather than to remain. In such an environment, concentration feels unnatural, even uncomfortable. Yet discomfort is not danger. It is simply unfamiliarity. Those who persist discover that concentration produces a form of inner silence, not emptiness, but coherence. Thoughts align instead of competing. Mental energy no longer disperses through endless internal commentary. Awareness becomes steadier, deeper, more intentional. This state is often mistaken for passivity. It is the opposite. Concentration does not dull the mind. It sharpens it. It does not restrict creativity. It gives creativity structure. It does not suppress emotion. It stabilizes it. The mind becomes less reactive, not because it is weaker, but because it is anchored. As concentration grows, the outer world begins to feel less intrusive. Distractions still appear, but they no longer dominate. You notice them without surrendering to them. The mind begins to distinguish between what is relevant and what is merely noisy. This is a profound shift. A person who can concentrate is no longer at the mercy of circumstance. They can remain inwardly steady while the outer environment changes. They can hold a vision long enough for it to mature. They can think deeply instead of endlessly. Concentration is not an end in itself. It is a gathering stage. It prepares the mind for command, for creation, for transformation. It is the furnace in which mental energy is refined before it is applied. Without it, power leaks away unnoticed. With it, power accumulates quietly. And once mental force has been gathered, it seeks direction. In the next movement of this work, you will encounter the faculty that gives concentration, purpose, and authority, the power of will, the inner principle that does not merely focus the mind, but decides its course. Chapter 4. The Power of Will, Inner Authority and Direction. Will is not force, it is authority. This distinction is essential. Most people associate will with tension, effort, or stubborn resistance. They imagine it as something harsh, something exhausting, something that must constantly struggle against impulse and circumstance. In reality, this misunderstanding is precisely why the will remains weak in so many lives. True will does not strain. It decides. Will is the faculty of inner command, the power that determines direction rather than reaction. It is the principle within you that says this way and continues to say it calmly, regardless of distraction, delay, or emotional weather. Where concentration gathers mental force, will aims it. Without will, concentration has no destination. Without concentration, will has no strength. Together, they form the axis of mental mastery. But will must be understood on its own terms, or it becomes confused with desire. And desire is not power. Desire pulls, will directs. Desire arises from lack. It longs, hopes, wishes. It fluctuates with mood and circumstance. Today it is strong, tomorrow it fades. Will, by contrast, does not beg or plead. It establishes a course and remains aligned with it. Desire says, I want. Will says, I choose. This is why so many people feel internally divided. They want one thing, fear another, and drift toward a third. Desire pulls them in multiple directions at once. Will resolves this fragmentation by choosing a single line of movement. When will is undeveloped, the mind negotiates endlessly. When will is trained, the mind obeys. This obedience is not oppressive, it is stabilizing. A mind governed by will feels calmer, not harsher. It no longer debates every impulse. It no longer collapses under contradiction. Decisions become fewer, but firmer. Inner life becomes quieter because authority has been established. Will is not loud. It does not argue. It does not explain itself. It simply holds. This is why weak will expresses itself through forceful emotion. Anger, urgency, and pressure arise when authority is missing. The mind tries to compensate for lack of direction with intensity, but intensity without direction scatters energy even faster. The trained will operates differently. It acts through consistency. It speaks once and remains present. It does not demand immediate results. It is content to move steadily, knowing that sustained direction is more powerful than short bursts of effort. To understand will is to understand self-governance. Every moment presents a choice, though most go unnoticed. To continue a thought or let it fade, to indulge an emotion or observe it, to act now or wait. These choices are small, but they are cumulative. Each time will is exercised, even gently, it strengthens. Each time it is ignored, it weakens. Will grows through use, not through heroic effort. It is strengthened when you keep a decision you made privately. It is weakened when you repeatedly overrule yourself. This is why self-command begins internally, long before it shows itself externally. A person who cannot keep an inner promise cannot sustain an outer one. A person who constantly negotiates with impulse cannot maintain direction. The will does not require perfection, it requires loyalty. Loyalty to a chosen direction even when progress feels slow, loyalty to a decision even when emotion fluctuates. Loyalty to inner order even when the outer world tempts distraction. As will develops, something subtle occurs in consciousness. Inner resistance decreases. The mind stops rebelling because it begins to trust its own leadership. Conflicting impulses lose strength because they are no longer indulged through indecision. The will becomes the organizing principle of the mind. This is not domination, it is alignment. A well-governed mind does not feel controlled. It feels integrated. Thought, emotion, imagination, and action begin to move in the same direction. Energy stops leaking through contradiction. Mental power becomes available for higher use. And this is where the metaphysical dimension becomes evident. A directed will does more than shape behavior. It shapes inner causation. When the will consistently chooses certain mental states over others, it alters the underlying patterns impressed upon the deeper layers of consciousness. Over time, these impressions reorganize experience itself. This is why will is central to mental transmutation. You cannot elevate a mental state without choosing to do so. You cannot abandon a destructive pattern without withdrawing will from it. You cannot sustain a higher level of consciousness without repeated inner consent. The will is the gatekeeper. It does not create energy. It decides where energy flows. When this faculty awakens, life begins to feel less accidental. You stop feeling carried by moods and impulses. You experience moments of inner stillness, not because nothing is happening, but because something is directing what happens. This is inner sovereignty. A sovereign does not react to every disturbance. They respond according to principle. In the same way, a person who has developed will not surrender mental authority to every passing thought or emotional surge. They remain present, aware, and aligned. This does not mean emotions disappear. It means they no longer rule. Will does not suppress emotion. It governs expression. It allows feeling without surrendering direction. It permits thought without losing command. It creates space between impulse and action, and in that space, freedom appears. Most people believe freedom comes from having fewer obligations. In truth, freedom comes from inner order. A disordered mind is never free, no matter how many choices it has. A governed mind is free even within limitation. This is why the cultivation of will is not optional for anyone seeking mental power. Without it, attention wanders, concentration dissolves, and imagination runs uncontrolled. With it, the mind becomes an instrument rather than a battlefield. In the next stage of this work, you will turn toward the faculty that gives shape to inner direction, imagination, and learn how the will and imagination, when united, become the formative power through which inner states begin to crystallize into experience. Chapter 5. Imagination. The formative power of mind. Imagination is the most misunderstood of all mental faculties. To the untrained mind, it appears frivolous, a place of fantasy, daydreams, and escape. To the disciplined mind, imagination reveals itself as something entirely different, the form-giving power through which inner states take shape before they appear in the world of experience. Imagination is not illusion, it is prefiguration. Nothing comes into being without first being imagined. Every invention, every structure, every system, every deliberate act was once held as an inner image before it became an outer fact. The physical world is filled with the solidified remains of imagination made real through sustained attention and will. This is why imagination occupies a central place in all metaphysical systems. It is the bridge between the invisible and the visible, the subtle faculty through which mental energy acquires form. Thought gives direction. Will gives authority. Imagination gives shape. Without imagination, thought remains abstract. Without imagination, will has nothing to act upon. It is imagination that translates intention into inner pattern. And inner pattern is what the deeper layers of consciousness respond to. The mind does not respond to words alone. It responds to images. When you think of a situation, you do not merely describe it internally. You picture it. You feel it. You sense its atmosphere. These imaginal impressions sink deeper than verbal statements ever could. They bypass surface resistance and impress themselves upon the subconscious level, where patterns are formed and repeated. This is why idle imagination is dangerous. When imagination is left undirected, it becomes a workshop for fear, anticipation, and unconscious rehearsal of unwanted outcomes. The mind repeatedly pictures loss, conflict, failure, or limitation, not because it desires them, but because imagination has not been given conscious direction. What is repeatedly imagined becomes familiar. What becomes familiar feels inevitable. What feels inevitable eventually expresses itself as experience. This process is not mystical. It is mechanical. The subconscious mind does not analyze images. It does not question their origin. It simply accepts them as templates. It then works faithfully to externalize them through behavior, perception, and circumstance. Imagination, then, is never neutral. It is either creating deliberately or repeating unconsciously. To develop mental power, imagination must be reclaimed from randomness and placed under the guidance of will. This does not mean suppressing imagery or forcing positivity. It means choosing what inner pictures are allowed to take root. Imagination responds to calm authority, not to force. When you attempt to violently replace images, resistance arises. When you gently but consistently redirect imagery, the mind begins to cooperate. The trained imagination is steady, not frantic. It is clear, not exaggerated. It is purposeful, not indulgent. This distinction is critical. Imagination is not strengthened through fantasy. It is strengthened through clarity and repetition. Vague images produce vague results. Contradictory images produce instability. Clear, emotionally neutral images held consistently produce alignment. Emotion amplifies imagination, but emotion without discipline distorts it. The goal is not emotional intensity, but emotional coherence. A calm, sustained image carries more formative power than a dramatic one held briefly. This is why imagination must be partnered with concentration. When imagination is focused and held steadily, it begins to operate as a creative force rather than a mental distraction. The image gains density. It feels more real internally, not because it is being forced, but because the mind has stopped pulling away from it. Over time, the image becomes a reference point. The subconscious begins to treat it as a familiar pattern. Behavior subtly adjusts to support it. Perception filters experience through it. Opportunities aligned with it become noticeable, not because the world has changed, but because the inner template has. Imagination does not compel reality. It invites correspondence. This is a crucial metaphysical distinction. The mind does not impose its images upon the world by force. It aligns itself with conditions that resonate with the sustained inner pattern. What appears as a coincidence is often correspondence responding to consistency. When imagination is united with will, this process accelerates. Will selects the image. Imagination sustains it. Attention nourishes it. Concentration stabilizes it. Together, these faculties create a coherent inner state, and coherence is power. Most people attempt to change their lives by altering outer behavior alone. They act differently while imagining the same outcomes. They repeat new actions while rehearsing old patterns internally. The subconscious receives mixed signals and responds with inconsistency. Mental mastery requires congruence. The inner picture must match the chosen direction. When imagination contradicts intention, intention weakens. When imagination supports will, resistance dissolves. This is why imagination cannot be treated lightly. It is not entertainment. It is instruction given to the deeper mind. A disciplined imagination does not escape reality. It prepares it. It allows you to rehearse states of being before they are required. It conditions the mind to recognize and accept higher patterns. It familiarizes consciousness with possibilities that once felt distant or unreal. This familiarity is powerful. The mind moves toward what feels natural by repeatedly imagining a certain state, calmly, clearly, without strain. You make that state psychologically accessible. What was once foreign becomes normal. What was once resisted becomes expected. This is the true work of imagination. It does not guarantee outcomes. It establishes readiness, and readiness is what allows opportunity, insight, and action to align without friction. In the next stage of this work, you will move beneath imagination into the deeper layer that receives its impressions, the subconscious mind, and learn how mental images once impressed are carried forward silently, shaping habit, perception, and experience long after conscious attention has moved on. Chapter 6. The Subconscious Mind, the Silent Builder. Beneath the surface activity of thought exists a deeper region of mind, quiet, receptive, and immensely powerful. This is the subconscious. It does not argue, analyze, or reason. It does not debate possibilities or weigh evidence. It accepts. And once it accepts an impression, it begins its work with unwavering fidelity. The subconscious is the builder of habit, the organizer of tendencies, and the silent architect behind behavior and experience. It does not initiate ideas on its own, nor does it question what it receives. It is not creative in the way the conscious mind is creative. Instead, it is formative. It takes the material supplied to it and shapes life accordingly. This is why understanding the subconscious is essential to mental mastery. Without this understanding, a person may believe they are exercising free choice, while in reality they are repeating patterns long established beneath awareness. Much of what is called personality, temperament, or destiny is simply subconscious conditioning expressing itself automatically. Most people attempt to change their lives at the conscious level alone. They make resolutions, repeat affirmations, and attempt to think differently. For a short time, the effort seems effective. But gradually old behaviors return, familiar reactions reappear, and the same limitations resurface. This leads many to believe that change is difficult or that something is wrong with them. The truth is simpler. The subconscious has already been impressed with different instructions formed through years of repetition, emotional experience, and unconscious imagination. The conscious mind may declare a new direction, but the subconscious continues to execute the old pattern because it has not yet received a stronger replacement. The subconscious does not respond to logic, it responds to impression. You may consciously understand that a fear is irrational or that a belief no longer serves you. Yet if the subconscious has accepted that fear or belief as a pattern, understanding alone will not dissolve it. The subconscious does not speak the language of explanation, it speaks the language of experience. Whatever is repeatedly presented to it, especially when accompanied by feeling, is accepted as truth. It does not judge, it does not discriminate, it does not decide whether an impression is beneficial or harmful. It simply builds according to what it receives. This is neither cruel nor unfair. It is lawful. Once an impression is accepted, the subconscious begins to express it outwardly through behavior, perception, and automatic reaction. It shapes what feels natural, what feels possible, and what feels inevitable. It influences what you notice, how you interpret events, and which choices feel comfortable or uncomfortable. This is why people often say they are trying to change, while feeling inwardly unchanged. The effort is real, but the deeper pattern remains intact. The subconscious has not yet been given a new image strong enough to replace the old one. Imagination is the language the subconscious understands best. Repetition is the method by which it learns. Emotion is the force that accelerates acceptance. Imagination provides form. Repetition provides familiarity. Emotion provides weight. When these elements combine, an impression sinks deeply and becomes persistent. Emotion, however, must be handled carefully. Strong, chaotic emotion creates distorted impressions. Fear, urgency, and inner conflict can imprint instability just as effectively as calm can imprint order. The subconscious registers intensity, not wisdom. Calm, sustained feeling produces stability. The subconscious prefers consistency over intensity. It responds not to what is dramatic, but to what is familiar. This is why subtle, repeated inner states are far more powerful than occasional bursts of force or enthusiasm. A single dramatic effort changes little. A quiet, repeated inner alignment changes everything. When the conscious mind impresses a new image consistently, without strain or contradiction, the subconscious begins to reorganize around it. Old habits weaken not because they are attacked, but because they are no longer reinforced. New tendencies form quietly. Resistance fades, not through force but through replacement. The subconscious does not erase, it replaces. This replacement happens gradually and often unnoticed. You may not feel different immediately, but over time reactions soften. Choices feel easier, certain behaviors lose their pull, new responses arise without struggle. This is the silent work of inner repatterning. Once the subconscious has accepted a pattern, it works tirelessly to maintain it. It coordinates perception, filters experience, and guides behavior to reinforce what has been impressed. What you notice in the world begins to shift, not because reality has changed, but because your inner lens has. This is why mastery requires patience. The subconscious does not move instantly, but it moves thoroughly. Once a pattern is established, effort decreases and alignment increases. What once required discipline becomes natural. To work with the subconscious is to stop fighting yourself and begin cooperating with the law. When the conscious mind learns how to impress the deeper mind deliberately, inner conflict dissolves and mental energy becomes available for higher use. In the next stage of this work, you will learn how to go beyond replacing individual habits and begin transforming entire states of being through the precise process known as mental transmutation. Chapter 7. Mental Transmutation, the Art of Inner Alchemy. Mental transmutation is the process by which one state of mind is transformed into another through understanding, direction, and elevation. It is not suppression, denial, or emotional force. It is inner alchemy, the conscious raising of mental conditions from lower expressions to higher ones. Most people attempt to deal with unwanted states by resisting them. They fight fear, condemn doubt, suppress anger, or attempt to ignore anxiety. This approach rarely succeeds. Resistance fixes attention on the very condition one wishes to escape, and what attention dwells upon, it strengthens. Mental transmutation follows a different law. A lower mental state cannot remain in the presence of a higher one that is sustained with consistency. Fear dissolves when clarity is introduced and maintained. Anxiety weakens when calm becomes established. Confusion gives way when purpose is steadily held. The lower state is not destroyed. It simply loses coherence. This is not a moral judgment, it is a vibrational law. Every mental state exists on a scale of frequency. Some states are heavy, contracted, and reactive. Others are light, expansive, and directive. When consciousness is deliberately lifted to a higher level on this scale, the lower state becomes incompatible and fades naturally. This is why force is unnecessary. You do not overcome fear by attacking it. You overcome fear by raising your state above it. Transmutation begins with awareness. You must first recognize the state you are experiencing without identifying with it. Most suffering is intensified by identification, by the belief that a temporary state is a permanent self. When you observe a state calmly, you create separation. You are no longer inside it, you are witnessing it. This observation alone weakens its grip. The next step is choice. You deliberately introduce a higher mental quality, not as a reaction, but as a replacement. Calm instead of agitation, order instead of confusion, determination instead of hesitation. You do this without waiting for the lower state to disappear first. This is crucial. If you wait for fear to vanish before choosing clarity, you remain governed by fear. Transmutation requires you to act from the higher state, while the lower one is still present. The moment you do this, the balance of power shifts. The mind cannot sustain two opposing states at the same intensity indefinitely. One must give way. When the higher state is maintained, quietly, steadily, without strain, the lower state yields. Mental transmutation is not emotional suppression. Energy is never destroyed. It is redirected. Fear contains energy. Anger contains energy. Doubt contains energy. When elevated, that same energy becomes alertness, strength, and discernment. This is why transmutation is alchemical rather than destructive. What determines the success of transmutation is consistency, not intensity. A brief elevation, followed by habitual descent, accomplishes little. A modest elevation sustained over time restructures the entire mental field. This is where will and concentration play their role. Will chooses the higher state. Concentration sustains it. Attention nourishes it. Together, they create stability. And stability is what allows a new mental condition to become dominant. As this practice continues, something changes fundamentally. You begin to experience emotions without being ruled by them. States arise, but they no longer dictate behavior. or identity. There is space between stimulus and response, and in that space, freedom appears. This freedom is not detachment from life, it is mastery within it. Mental transmutation also reveals an important truth. Most negative states persist, not because they are powerful, but because they are habitual. They recur because they are familiar. When familiarity is replaced with a higher norm, the old state loses its footing. Over time, you notice that certain reactions no longer arise at all. Situations that once produced inner turmoil now pass with minimal disturbance. This is not numbness, it is a regulation. The mind has learned a new default. Transmutation is not performed once, it is practiced. Each successful elevation makes the next one easier. The mind learns that it is not bound to its initial reactions. It becomes flexible, responsive, and resilient. This, the true meaning of emotional strength. A strong mind is not one that never experiences lower states. It is one that can move through them without being captured. As this capacity develops, inner life becomes lighter. Energy once consumed by resistance becomes available for creativity, insight, and purposeful action. The mind stops oscillating wildly and begins to stabilize at higher levels of function. This stabilization has outward effects. Decisions become clearer. Relationships become less reactive. Circumstances feel less oppressive because the inner response is no longer automatic. Mental transmutation does not remove challenges, it changes how challenges are met. And this is power. In the next movement of this work, you will explore how mental states extend beyond the individual, how thought radiates outward, influences environments, and shapes interactions silently, often without a single word being spoken. Chapter 8. Mental Radiation and Invisible Influence. Every mental state emits an atmosphere. This is not metaphorical language. Wherever consciousness exists, influence follows. Thought is not confined to the boundaries of the body or limited to silent inner dialogue. It radiates outward subtly, shaping presence, tone, and interaction, long before words are spoken or actions are taken. You have experienced this even if you have never named it. You have entered a room and felt tension without knowing why. You have felt at ease around certain individuals and uneasy around others without any obvious cause. You have sensed confidence, insecurity, hostility, or calm in another person before they spoke a single word. These experiences point to a quiet truth. Mental states communicate silently. This is mental radiation. Most people radiate unconsciously. Their inner condition leaks outward automatically. Anxiety creates an anxious atmosphere. Calm establishes ease. Confusion generates disorder. Coherence brings stability. This transmission is not deliberate for most people. It is incidental. Yet its effects are real and persistent. Mental radiation does not require effort. It requires consistency of inner state. When the mind is fragmented, influence is erratic. One moment calm, the next reactive. One moment confident, the next uncertain. This inconsistency weakens influence because there is no stable signal being transmitted. Others sense the fluctuation even if they cannot explain it. When the mind is coherent, influence becomes steady. A person with inner order does not need to dominate, persuade, or impress. Their presence alone carries weight. Others respond not to personality, but to mental alignment. This is why some individuals seem to affect environments simply by entering them. They do not attempt to influence. They are aligned, and alignment radiates. This influence operates beneath conscious awareness. It bypasses argument and explanation. It does not rely on language. It is received intuitively, felt rather than analyzed. This is why it is so powerful. Mental radiation explains why words often fail where presence succeeds. A person may say all the right things and yet fail to persuade. Another may say very little and yet command attention. The difference lies not in speech, but in the state of mind behind the speech. Words carry the vibration of the mental condition from which they arise. When the inner state contradicts the spoken message, others sense the contradiction. When the inner state and the message align, communication becomes effortless. This is why attempts to influence others through technique alone often fail. Without inner coherence, technique feels hollow. Mental radiation exposes incongruence instantly. The disciplined mind understands this and works inwardly rather than outwardly. It does not attempt to manipulate environments or control others. It governs its own state. And as that state stabilizes, influence emerges naturally. This principle applies not only to human interaction, but to all environments. Mental atmosphere affects work, creativity, decision-making, and even the perception of opportunity. A mind habitually occupied by urgency creates an atmosphere of pressure. A mind anchored in clarity creates space for insight. This is why certain environments feel oppressive, while others feel expansive, even when nothing outwardly differs. The collective mental radiation of those within them shapes the atmosphere. But the most important influence is the one you exert upon yourself. You are always immersed in your own mental field. The thoughts you habitually sustain become the atmosphere in which you live. If that atmosphere is tense, life feels heavy. If it is ordered, life feels manageable. If it is elevated, life feels responsive. This is not because circumstances vanish, but because the inner environment has changed. Mental radiation, then, is not merely about affecting others. It is about creating an inner climate in which higher responses become possible. When the mind radiates calm, calm becomes easier to maintain. When it radiates confidence, confidence becomes self-reinforcing. This is how inner states stabilize. The mind entrains itself. When awareness becomes sensitive enough, you begin to notice the moment-to-moment quality of your inner atmosphere. You sense when it contracts, when it scatters, when it steadies. This sensitivity allows correction before descent becomes habit. You no longer wait for emotional extremes to regain balance. You adjust early, subtly, quietly. This is refinement. A refined mind does not fluctuate wildly. It may move, but it returns quickly to center. Its radiation becomes reliable. Others experience it as grounded, composed, and present. This reliability is power. It creates trust without persuasion. It creates authority without force. It creates influence without demand. Mental radiation also explains why inner discipline must precede outer ambition. A person seeking to shape outcomes without governing inner states broadcasts a contradiction. A person who governs inner states aligns outcomes naturally. This alignment cannot be faked. It cannot be rushed. It arises only from sustained inner work. As mental radiation becomes steadier, something else occurs. The mind becomes less reactive to external atmospheres. You are no longer pulled into every emotional field you encounter. You remain centered within your own. This is not isolation. It is sovereignty. You can engage without absorption. You can empathize without destabilization. You can move through chaotic environments without internal chaos. This ability marks a significant stage of mental mastery. When the mind reaches this level of coherence, it becomes ready for the final refinement, the cultivation of inner stillness, where mental power is no longer expended unnecessarily, but gathered, preserved, and applied with precision. That stillness is not withdrawal from life. It is the source from which the highest form of mental power arises. Chapter 9. Inner Stillness, the Reservoir of Power. Inner stillness is not the absence of thought. It is the absence of compulsion. Most people associate stillness with inactivity, emptiness, or withdrawal from life. In truth, inner stillness is the most concentrated form of mental power. It is the state in which energy is no longer wasted through constant reaction, commentary, and inner noise. It is the condition in which the mind becomes available rather than busy. A restless mind dissipates force continuously. Each reaction, each unnecessary thought, each emotional surge releases energy outward without direction. Over time, this constant expenditure produces fatigue, confusion, and a sense of inner weakness. Not because life is demanding, but because the mind has never learned how to hold its own power. Stillness reverses this process. When the mind is no longer compelled to react to every stimulus, energy gathers, thought slows, not because it has been suppressed, but because it is no longer driven by habit. Awareness remains present without chasing or resisting experience. This state cannot be forced. Any attempt to impose stillness through effort creates tension, and tension is movement. Stillness arises naturally as the earlier faculties, attention, concentration, will, imagination, and emotional regulation come into alignment. When inner conflict dissolves, stillness appears. In stillness, the mind is neither passive nor dull. It is alert and receptive. Perception sharpens, insight arises spontaneously. Decisions feel clearer because they are no longer buried beneath noise. This is why wisdom has always been associated with silence rather than speech. Silence is not empty. It is pregnant with potential. From stillness, thought emerges with precision rather than urgency. Instead of a stream of unexamined ideas, there is a pause, and from that pause, a chosen response. This pause creates freedom. It separates stimulus from reaction. It restores choice. Most people live without this pause. Life happens and reaction follows instantly. Stillness inserts a moment of awareness, and within that moment, mastery becomes possible. This is not detachment from life. It is intimacy without entanglement. A still mind can engage deeply without being overwhelmed. It can feel full without being captured by feeling. It can act decisively without agitation. Stillness does not reduce vitality. It organizes it. As this state becomes familiar, the mind begins to recognize stillness as home. It no longer fears silence. It no longer seeks constant stimulation to feel alive. It becomes comfortable resting within itself. This comfort changes everything. The need for external validation diminishes. Urgency softens. Mental effort decreases. Action becomes simpler because it is no longer burdened by internal debate. You begin to act from alignment rather than from pressure. This is why stillness is a reservoir of power. Energy conserved through non-reaction becomes available for creation, insight, and purposeful movement. The mind no longer leaks force through worry or anticipation. It applies energy selectively, only where direction has been chosen. This selectivity is a strength. In stillness, the mind becomes transparent to itself. You begin to see thoughts arise and pass without identification. Emotions move without dominating. Identity loosens its grip. You are no longer the content of the mind. You are the space in which it occurs. This shift is subtle but profound. When identity no longer clings to thought, suffering diminishes. Problems still appear, but they do not define the self. Challenges still arise, but they are met without inner collapse. The mind becomes resilient because it is no longer rigid. Stillness also refines perception of mental law. You begin to notice how quickly states form, how easily attention is drawn, how subtle changes in inner posture affect experience. This awareness makes correction effortless. You adjust early before the imbalance hardens into a pattern. This is the maturity of mind. A mature mind does not seek to dominate the world. It seeks to govern itself. It understands that outer control without inner order produces conflict, while inner order naturally organizes outer life. When stillness is present, the earlier faculties operate at a higher level. Attention becomes precise. Concentration deepens effortlessly. Will acts without strain. Imagination becomes clear rather than chaotic. Emotion becomes refined rather than volatile. All mental powers converge here. This is why stillness is not an end, but a culmination. It is the condition in which all developed faculties function harmoniously. From this state, action is not forced, and inaction is not avoidance. Both arise appropriately. Inner stillness does not remove responsibility. It clarifies it. You no longer act to escape discomfort or prove worth. You act because the direction is clear. When action is required, you move. When waiting is required, you remain. Both are done without inner resistance. This is the mark of true mental mastery. In the closing movement of this work, you will see the full contrast between the mechanical mind that lives unconsciously under mental law and the awakened mind that understands law and cooperates with it deliberately, not through effort, but through alignment. Conclusion. From mechanical living to conscious mastery. All power you have explored in this work was never absent from you. It was merely unclaimed. The faculties described, attention, concentration, will, imagination, subconscious alignment, transmutation, influence, and stillness each command, are not additions to the mind. They are its native capacities, long overshadowed by habit, distraction, and unconscious living. Most people live mechanically. Thought arises, emotion follows, action repeats. Life appears to happen on its own terms, driven by circumstances and chance. In this state, the individual lives under mental law, subject to forces they do not understand and therefore cannot direct. This is not failure, it is sleep. Awakening begins the moment you recognize that the mind is not merely a place where thoughts occur, but a field of causation. From that moment, responsibility shifts inward, not as burden, but as liberation. You are no longer compelled to fight the world. You are invited to govern the source from which your experience flows. This governance does not require constant effort. It requires understanding. When attention is reclaimed, the mind stops bleeding energy. When concentration is cultivated, power gathers naturally. When will is established, direction becomes stable. When imagination is disciplined, inner patterns become coherent. When the subconscious is impressed deliberately, change becomes lasting. When mental states are transmuted, struggle gives way to elevation. When influence becomes conscious, presence replaces persuasion. When stillness is known, power is conserved and applied with precision. Each faculty supports the others. None stands alone. Together, they form an integrated system, a mind no longer divided against itself. This integration is mastery. Mental mastery does not mean controlling every thought or emotion. It means no longer being controlled by them. States may arise, but they do not dictate identity. Circumstances may change, but they do not determine inner order. The mind becomes responsive rather than reactive, deliberate rather than impulsive. This is the difference between drifting and directing. You do not need to withdraw from life to live consciously. Mastery is not escape. It is engagement without entanglement. It is the ability to act decisively without inner conflict, to remain calm without indifference, to be present without being pulled apart. Such a mind moves differently through the world. It does not hurry unnecessarily. It does not resist what cannot be changed. It does not cling to what must pass. It does not chase power outwardly. It understands that all outer order begins as inner order. This understanding brings a quiet confidence, not arrogance, not dominance, confidence rooted in alignment. When the inner world is governed, the outer world becomes workable. Challenges remain, but they are met with stability rather than fear. Decisions arise from clarity rather than pressure. This is why true power is subtle. It does not announce itself. It does not demand recognition. It does not seek validation. It is felt in restraint, in composure, in the ability to remain centered when others scatter. It is evident in consistency, not intensity, in presence, not performance. The mind trained in this way becomes an instrument rather than a battlefield, and this training is never complete. It deepens with use. Each day offers opportunities to choose awareness over habit, direction over reaction, elevation over resistance. Each choice strengthens the inner structure. Each return to alignment refines the system. You are not asked to be perfect. You are asked to be conscious. When consciousness governs, error corrects itself. When awareness is present, imbalance is noticed early. When inner authority is established, life no longer feels adversarial. You stop asking, "Why is this happening to me?" and begin asking, "What state am I operating from?" That single shift changes everything. The mind, once understood, becomes a partner rather than an obstacle. Life, once resisted, becomes responsive, and power, once sought outwardly, is recognized as something you have been exercising all along, unconsciously or deliberately. This work has not given you power, it has returned it to your keeping. What you do with it now is a matter of choice, and choice, when sustained, becomes destiny.